The Chinese system today involves political centralization and economic decentralization. This is different than the Mao era, where everything was centralized. Politically, national leaders appoint subnational and regional leaders. It's like one big hierarchy from the top, which is the Communist Party, all the way down to the people that manage the towns or the counties or the provinces. There is no democratic constituency. So these political leaders are not elected by the people, and therefore they are not, their loyalty is not to the people, it is to that Communist Party, that national leadership. Okay. There is no separation of powers, no different branches of government that check each other. There's no independent judiciary. The judiciary is part of government and is loyal to the government. And there is no rule of law, no constitution that is put forth by the people independent of the government. The constitution that China has is created by the government, by that central command. Very different than Western democracies, where you have national leaders, but they don't appoint subnational or regional leaders. Those are elected positions at all levels. There is a democratic constituency which makes the leaders in the US loyal to the people, not to any particular party or national figure. And there is separation of powers. You have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, and they hold each other in check. They're separate but equal powers. And there is an independent judiciary with the rule of law, right? You have a constitution for the people, by the people, that overrides the political leaders. And the judiciary ensures compliance of those political leaders to that constitution. So very different. There is economic decentralization, however, and this is something that evolved during the reform era as the market forces started to take hold and the localities began to operate much more autonomously for their economic benefit. We call this decentralization a regionally decentralized authoritarian regime. Authoritarian meaning the political sphere is in charge of everything. They have ultimate authority, but they're kind of allowing for the regions to decentralize and make these economic decisions. This is important because by decentralizing, they're going to create more efficient allocation of resources, because what's right for one region may not be right for another. And at the national level, they can't distinguish between the two. So they make decisions that are often very inefficient. But with the decentralization, you'll see China start to accelerate economically. About 70% of total public expenditures in China actually takes place at the subnational level, the provincial, county, or township level. That means 30% takes place at the national level. So the majority of the government spending is actually being directed by non-national figures. Let's take a look at how the government is structured and some of the economics that underlie that. At the top, you have the central government, which operates around 2,000 state-owned enterprises and employs just under 3 million people. If we go down a notch to the provinces, the autonomous regions, and the municipalities, the subnational government, you'll notice that the number of firms goes to 270,000. That's a big difference, 2,000 to 270,000, and employment goes from just under 3 million to 66 million. So it's clear that there is a decentralization economically, just based on this data here. And this is 2011 data, by the way. Now you can continue down and look at municipalities, counties, and townships, but the overarching point is that China has moved away from managing its economy via the central government, instead managing it at the local level. Here's a map to kind of highlight how China's geography works out. You have 22 provinces that are pretty much independently operated by their own governments. You also have 5 autonomous regions. These regions have been granted a higher level of discretion, not only over their economic affairs, but over their political affairs as well. Next, you have 4 municipalities, which are areas directly administered by the national government, and the Beijing is the headquarters. That's actually the capital of China, where the national government resides and the Communist Party resides. And then you have 2 special administrative regions, Hong Kong and Macau. These areas are more analogous to independent nations. Although China does not consider them independent nations, they operate as such. For example, in Hong Kong, they have a separate constitution. They do have voting rights. They have free markets and a democratic political system, much more compatible with Western culture than with China. A note here, Hong Kong was colonized by the British, so they brought their ideas to that area, which makes Hong Kong, for the most part, a Anglo-Saxon type economy. And then Macau was originally colonized by the Portuguese. So again, you have that European style of government coming in there. But they are part of China. It's just administered very different than these other regions. Now, Taiwan is claimed by China, but is operated as an independent nation. And many countries of the world do acknowledge Taiwan's autonomy. Regardless, China does not, but Taiwan is more comparable to Hong Kong in its administration. That is, it has a primarily free market economy and democratic government. Okay, so that's kind of the overview. There's a lot of complexities here that we can't get into, but it does give you perspective. Let's talk about the Chinese political system. At the highest level, you have the National Congress. And this is 3,000 delegates that make up a unicameral legislature, as opposed to a bicameral. In the US, we have the House and the Senate, right, which kind of check and balance each other. In China, they have a legislature, but it's just one unified body. They meet every 5 years to ratify the Central Committee's policies. And this is the highest and most important political body. The picture back here was of the National Congress. This is in Tiananmen Square, China, Beijing, I should say. The Central Committee is about 300 of these top leaders from the National Congress, and they meet kind of in between the 5-year periods in what are called plenums or plenary sessions. This Central Committee is headed by the General Secretary of the Communist Party. Currently, that is Xi Jinping. He is leader for life. Within the Central Committee, we also have the Cadres Department. They're in charge of appointing officials to elite positions in the party and in the state. We talked about the nomenclatura before, right? Those named positions that must be filled with loyal Communist Party members. Well, the Cadres Department is the group that appoints those people. The Inspection Committee is designed to root out corruption. This is the disciplinary arm of the government. And this is designed to discipline those people in the party that are not complying, that are engaging in practices that are incompatible with the party's goal. Next, we have the Politburo. This means political bureau in Russian. It's about 25 leaders from both the national and regional government. So you're bringing together the localities with the larger central government for decision-making purposes. It is the most powerful political body. It's not the highest and most important. That's the National Congress. That's the Communist Party. But it is the most powerful because this Politburo and its leaders effectively run the country. And the head of the Central Committee, Xi Jinping, is also the head of the Politburo. The State Council is next. This is the executive branch of government. It's headed by a premier, Li Keqiang, currently, and it carries out the directives of the Communist Party. In essence, the State Council executes the policies that the National Congress, the Central Committee, and the Politburo bring forth. Making sense of this system can be challenging if you're looking at it from a Western democratic standpoint. But to simplify things, think of the National Congress as the legislative branch that kind of makes the laws, and then the Central Committee and the Politburo as subcommittees within the legislature to ensure more frequent interaction and bring together people for more specific tasks. That means all of this is pretty much legislative in nature. And then the state council becomes analogous to kind of the executive branch in the US, the president that implements whatever laws and policies the legislation put forth. The Chinese political system involves reshuffling. Regional leaders are moved around regularly to ensure competition and increase centralization of power. There is an ongoing concern for the national government that a particular province, any one of these provinces that are governed by regional leaders, will start to gain more influence and more power and eventually form a coup and rebel against the national government. So what they do is they move leaders around, right? The leader of this province might be moved here, right? The leader of this province might be moved over here, so on and so forth. That's called reshuffling. And they don't just do it at the provincial level, they do it at all subnational levels. It also ensures competition because regional leaders are forced to compete with other regional leaders. And you might have one regional leader that operates in a region that has, let's say, more resources and a better workforce, that kind of thing. So they end up being more productive than another region. But they're not going to get to stay there and rest on their laurels. They're going to have to go to maybe a region that's more challenging. And it keeps people on their game and ensures that leaders are always putting forth their best. The Chinese government uses an organizational structure known as M form, which stands for multi-divisional form. That means that the central government is first decentralized into regions, and then regions into provinces, and then provinces have their own sectoral management. So province A will manage its finance sector and agricultural sector and industrial sector. Province B will manage its own finance sector, agricultural sector, industry sector. It's like making each province its own little autonomous government. The idea here, of course, is efficiency. If you use the alternative U form, which is what the Soviets did and what the Chinese did under Mao, that means the central government doesn't provide this regional discretion. Instead, they control the finance, the agricultural, and the industrial components of the economy. Recall before that information is a challenge in terms of managing industries, right? And so when you have a centralized government, they don't have all the information that is necessary to efficiently allocate resources at those lower levels. China is trying to bypass that inefficiency by using this M form, something that it learned by trial and error to do. Let's wrap up with press freedom and religious freedom in China. All media is either owned or heavily controlled by the state, and dissident information is not allowed. The Chinese government has a censorship department that actively monitors the internet and other media to ensure that there is no negative portrayal of the government or the leaders. You're not allowed to speak negatively of the leadership and the government. The religious freedoms are also limited. China considers itself an atheist government. That's very common in communist nations because the ideology of communism that Marx put forth saw religion as part of a superstructure that was used to oppress the proletariat, the underclass. So religion is frowned upon. There are restrictions on religious schooling and extent of activity. So schools can teach certain religions, but it cannot override the national government's agenda. The national government is supreme and should be the primary source of wisdom and guidance, not religion. But there are officially recognized religions here. You can practice these with little intervention as long as they're very localized and you're not spreading them on a large scale. All right, that's pretty much it for China. There's much more to talk about, but the goal was to give you an overview of the political and economic environment.